Hello and welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will be interviewing Brother Chris Croda of the Grand Lodge Technology Committee of the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and the Yukon.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
I'm Very Worshipful Brother Matthew Appel, and with Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth, we're Masons here in Washington State. And we have with us Right Worshipful Brother Trevor McKeown and Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung, who are the Canadian half of our podcast host team. And our special guest this evening is Brother Christopher Croda, who is on the Grand Lodge Technology Committee for the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Ancient Free and Accepted Masons of British Columbia and the Yukon. And Brother Chris, thank you very much for coming out and being on our show yet again.
Well, thanks for having me, Matt.
So this evening, Brother Chris has a brief presentation on the Zoom etiquette for official meetings that British Columbia will be having here. I guess you've already had one, and there'll be more coming. Right. And then we're going to have a discussion sort of Zoom etiquette in general for Masonic meetings. So I guess with that, Brother Chris, take it away.
Thank you. Well, first, a little bit of background. I actually do tech support and hosting of Zoom meetings professionally. And so this aspect is not something that's foreign to myself and my skill set. We've got a very strong technology committee in British Columbia and Yukon. Brother Stephen Chung is one of the members of it, and we have been very active in supporting the Zoom meetings that have been going on within the jurisdiction. We had the Grand Master on in a recent podcast, and one of the things that he mentioned was when we first got it started with these Zoom meetings, it was just a bunch of guys hanging around in jeans, getting together, and really coming together to experience some of the fellowship. And that was great for just to get people still engaged and still involved. But we need to start moving forward. If we don't start moving forward and we're able to do more of our business, whatever that looks like over this technology, we're basically going to be a snapshot of 2019. There's a whole lot of lodges that are in this boat right now. So one of our Grand Master here in British Columbia and Yukon, Most Worshipful Brother Don McKenzie, one of the things that he has been wanting to do is move forward with his official visits and with the District Deputy Grand Masters visits to the districts and to the lodges through Zoom technology. And what that does is it really gives it a much more formal it makes these meetings a lot more formal, and with that comes a certain amount of etiquette that's necessary. The other thing it's doing is these meetings are getting very, very large. Our first official visit probably would have gone up to 150 attendees. As it went to 100. Because I forgot to click the button to extend it to over 100 people, but that's another story. Anyway, the next one, which is coming up on Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021, will definitely be well over 100. So we also need to be able to manage some of these much larger meetings. And I've got some tools that we're going to be using here. So let me go ahead and show you what we have. Okay, Zoom etiquette for the official visits. The first thing is we set a start time for our meetings of half an hour before the actual meeting begins. So if it's a 7 p.m. start time, we'll have people come on at 6:30. Now, this is really important because, of course, the Grand Director of Ceremonies needs to get the suite together, and we also need to make sure that all of the brethren are properly clothed, but also properly named. So what we do experience with a meeting of, say, 200 people or something like that, is a certain portion of them will come on, and if they just click the link instead of putting the meeting code and the passcode in, if they just click the link that's provided, which is how most people get into these meetings, it takes them right in, and it doesn't give them the option to change their name. So we get a lot of Mary's iPhone or John's iPad as instead of the actual brethren's name. So if by starting the meeting half an hour early on the larger meetings, it gives us an opportunity to work with some of those brethren and get their names changed. Dress code is formal, so tux, white shirt, dark tie. For the lodge officers, district lodge officers, and for the lodge officers of lodges. Dark suit, white shirt, dark tie for everybody else. I think it's really important as we start doing more business over this technology that we really start making this much more like a regular meeting. Much more feel like a regular meeting, so that we can move forward. We'll make sure that we're in a quiet room where nobody is within earshot. Now, at this point, these are open meetings, right? So if there is somebody in the background, it's not the end of the world. But again, we're really making an effort here to move towards regularity of our meetings, to move towards a situation where we can at least feel like it's a tiled environment. So we call that please self-tile your environment. We've all done that in this meeting here this evening, right? So that's a good example. I suggest using a USB headset if one is available, and that just improves the audio quality. Make sure your internet connection is good. I always recommend being in the same room as your router or in the next room. Where you can run into problems with the Wi-Fi connection is if you go to a nice quiet room, but it's on a different floor than your router is. So that's always a concern. Update your Zoom software on your computer. There's a lot of people that don't like to update different various applications on their computer. And if you're one of those people, that's great. But always, always, always update your Zoom. Not only does it give you better features, but it also fixes bugs and gives you additional security with the Zoom application. So it's important to keep your Zoom up to date. Video backgrounds should be tasteful, not distracting. And the one that is behind this presentation, for example, is one that was developed to be used as a background as well. I don't currently use backgrounds because I don't have a green screen or a solid color behind me, but that also helps out a great deal. Is if you put up a sheet or a green screen behind yourself if you're going to use backgrounds. Do not record the meeting through the Zoom application. If you record on the cloud, that's a premium service, and the account owner could be charged extra. I always recommend that if you're going to record the meeting, to use a separate recording device. This is probably the most important one. This last point is the most important one, and the one that in order to make our larger meetings of attendance of 100 people or more work smoothly for us, the main one that we need to work through is the naming convention, or people renaming themselves in general. The naming convention we'd like people to use is rank, first name, last name, and then lodge number. And I've got one more slide, and the last slide is a little bit of an instruction on for brethren on how to rename themselves once they've come into Zoom. So I've got a screenshot here. That's not actually me frozen with a bad internet connection. It's just a screenshot I took. And basically what I'd like to point out is what you do is when you come into a Zoom meeting, if you realize that your name is wrong, up by your webcam, not anybody else's webcam, but your webcam, there's a little box with 3 dots. If you click on that little box with 3 dots, a drop-down menu appears. And as you can see, one of the options that you can have is rename. This option will actually give you the ability to rename yourself. And this is obviously the best way if you just click on the link and then enter the meeting, and the name that appears below you below your webcam is not what it needs to be. This is the easiest way to rename yourself. There's a number of other ways that people can rename themselves. But that is, I would say that for people to rename themselves in a meeting, that's probably the simplest. Because all you really need to do is go find your webcam wherever it appeared in the meeting, click on those little 3 dots, go down to rename, and then rename yourself as necessary. And although we'd like to have the rank, first name, last name, and lodge number, if we just have the first name and last name instead of, Fred's iPhone, that's extremely helpful. Just having that right there. So, yeah, that's really all I had. Any? Yeah.
I really appreciate the idea of the early start time. I think in general, if we think about meetings, one of my mentors would always say, well, if you're not a half hour early, you're late. If you're there at 7 o'clock when the meeting start, you're already late. And so, if we all showed up at 7 o'clock to the front door of the building and expected the meeting to start, that wouldn't happen either. So, there are people there potentially an hour and a half early, getting things ready, setting up, just having a cup of coffee, whatever. And people expect to just be able to sit down and click at 6:59 and be able to get into the meeting. And so, yeah, half hour or more potentially is, especially for an important meeting, maybe a district event might even be longer.
Absolutely. And what I would normally recommend for people who are hosting these meetings, and the larger meetings, of course, you need a little bit more lead time, is I recommend coming on for the host to start the meeting 45 minutes early, and then the brethren to come on half an hour early. As you mentioned, David, if it was an in-person meeting, you wouldn't show up 30 seconds before that meeting and expect to have, be able to sign the porch book and find your place, right? You would show up 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour ahead of time. So what we're trying to do is figure out some sort of a system where brethren can come in and do this and have some sort of a little bit of social time, which is still a bit of a challenge with a Zoom meeting with 150 of your closest friends on it. So we're still trying to work around that.
Our local Rainbow Assembly, my daughter's a member of that, and she was invited to an installation, and they had where they all logged in an hour early, and they got set up, ready to go 5, 10, 15 minutes. It was pretty fast. They were all ready. They had practiced, of course. Mm-hmm. And so for that half hour, 45 minutes before the event, they could go away or whatever, just leave their computer running, turn off their video, turn off their sound if they wanted to. But it was planned to be part of that. So yeah, planning that early start time and planning ahead of time, having a practice if it's an important event, having a simulation to make sure everything works, turning your video on and off, turning your audio on and off, making sure you've got good quality audio. One of the things I've learned in my time here is kind of being the default tech guy. I've watched a lot of videos, a lot of YouTube University about video and audio and all that. And over and over and over again, I've heard if your audio is good, people will still pay attention even if your video is bad. But if your audio is bad, you've lost your audience. So making sure you have some kind of good audio system is really critical. And so I'm kind of not the audio czar here. Always telling, hey, can you turn it up, turn it down, change it, whatever. But it's so critical. It's so critical.
Yeah.
It really is.
Lighting is another very important thing that a lot of people don't realize. And it's as simple as having a light behind the laptop that you're using or the device that you're using so that it lights you up from behind the camera. And unfortunately, some guys not everybody has the ability to do that, depending on the device and where their little office is set up or their quiet area where they can tile. But I know that it's also something that not a lot of people get told. is about the lighting. So, brethren, if you're listening to this, one of those tips is to put a lamp behind your laptop or your camera.
Absolutely.
Lights you face up.
The number one mistake I see with lighting is people say, well, gee, it's kind of dark in this room. I'll just open the window. Well, that window is probably behind you and you're now backlit. So that's probably the number one mistake I see. You probably want to close that window and turn on as many lights in the room as possible. That's usually the best way to go with lighting. There are a lot of very inexpensive lighting options now, and luckily, with early on in the pandemic, I got the circle light going. Luckily, early on in the pandemic, there was I've got one too. You can probably see the reflection in my glasses. But anyway, early in the pandemic, a lot of this equipment was sold out. USB headsets, USB microphones, circle lights. You couldn't find any of them for a couple of months, but the supply has come back on those, so they're available again.
Christopher,
they're at Costco now.
A moment ago, you commented on how a whole bunch of people will come into a meeting and it's difficult to have individual conversations.
Yes.
I've read a number of papers recently. I haven't tried any of this software. Mm-hmm. We tend to use Zoom as our go-to. I've only had to deal with WebEx a couple of times, and I can understand why we all prefer Zoom after using WebEx.
Yeah.
There are others, but there are others coming up the pike that will allow things like I could click on 3 or 4 of the pictures, our conversation would be louder and everyone else would drift back. Mm-hmm. Things like that. So I don't know if they're out there yet or not, but there's
what we're looking at doing is possibly using breakout rooms.
That's another option.
Yeah, and breakout rooms for some of the larger meetings to see if we can get some of the brethren together in smaller groups. I don't know how that's going to work quite yet, but I have been researching it, and the good news is that it doesn't look like we have a minimum for the number of people that we can put in those breakout rooms. That's going to. I think the minimum is the maximum per breakout room is something like 50. And you probably would want no more than 20 or 30 in a given breakout room anyway. Otherwise, it starts getting difficult for everybody to communicate with each other. But what it does is it takes it into its own little side meeting of these 20 or 30 brethren.
I suggest the maximum, like a decent committee, is 8.
Yeah, that was going to get a little bit difficult with a meeting of 200 people in order to be able to manage breakout rooms or to put people in breakout rooms in increments of 8 or even 10, right? That's a lot of rooms because it takes a certain amount of time to assign everybody to those rooms. And then it takes a certain amount of time to assign everybody back to the main meeting. And those lag times we need to get those lag times down as quickly as possible.
I've been involved in a couple of conversations about the use of maybe breakout rooms in some of these meetings we're going to have. And the common comment is that's no different than those 6 guys going to sit over by themselves in the corner of the festive board and disassociate from everybody else. And there was a lot of discussion about that because that's not the idea. The idea I know is to give them a forum where they can communicate maybe a little quieter with less distraction or not as many people in there. But it still seems like that group that goes off to the corner in the festive board, right?
It does, and there's not much to be done about that, although all I have to say is that the only other option with this particular technology is to try to communicate with 150 people simultaneously, and that's just not reasonable. It's just not reasonable. So to section off some different various breakout rooms for some social time. And realistically, this is only going to be for brethren who come in early anyway. The people who are rolling in 15 minutes before the meeting, if we say the meeting starts at 7 and you need to be on at 6:30, and a bunch of people come on at 6:45, we're probably just going to leave them in the main meeting in order to be able to expedite things anyway.
I've been impressed not only with Vancouver, British Columbia, and Yukon meetings that I've attended, but even some in Washington, other places, that there's been a surgence of respectful quietness just before the meeting begins in many cases. And I think it's a tone that's set, of course, from the beginning, and also the host, if they're control of the mute button. But Matt has said several times, and I steal this line until it's mine, that if what we come back to is not different than what we left, then we're in a bad position. If the lodge isn't better than we came back to, I don't know about how your ritual or how your meetings begin, but many times our meetings, they're quite jovial, and then finally we kind of sit down and calm down, but then the guys still chitter chatter on the sidelines even during ritual sometimes, and it annoys me as one of those grumpy past masters. But maybe as a part of this Zoom process, we'll learn that, hey, there's a quiet contemplation that should occur prior to the opening of the meeting and the beginning of the meeting. That's what we talk about ritual, why it's so important. I don't mean to make this a ritual event, but our meeting, the ritual is so important because it's supposed to set the tone for you, the transition from the secular world to the Freemason world, and the contemplation aspect of what Freemasonry is. And that's one of the key elements of what ritual is all about. And so having that quiet contemplation, which is reminiscent of the time before your different terms, but the time before your degree, before your degree begins, and then the ritual begins in that transformation, and then now you're in that lodge setting, in that sacred setting of the lodge. And so that, I think it's important to have the early start time, all these things that just play together.
Mm-hmm. It's really a combination of different various techniques that we're using. It is very helpful, though, that Freemasons do tend to like to follow rules, because I've hosted a lot of these meetings before, and let's just say it has been more difficult to wrangle other groups.
But we're used to be heard. We are used to be herded like cats.
I know we're getting kind of close to the end here, but we mentioned also about virtual backgrounds, and Steve,
Yes.
you indicated that lighting is important, and I absolutely agree. Steve's done a very good job with his virtual backgrounds, but his lighting, his frontal lighting, face lighting, is good enough that it separates himself from that virtual background, where sometimes you get the ghost idea where somebody put his hand up or whatever, and then now it's disappearing, or it's kind of coming and going. And
that's more actually a function of your background, believe it or not. The light, the even lighting is extremely important, but the key to virtual backgrounds is putting up a backdrop behind you that's consistent lighting. You can see in my backdrop right here how I've got a dark red color over here and then a light color here. What happens if I put a background in? These are going to key differently. And when people's body parts disappear, it would be, for example, like it's going to key out really well in this bright part, but as soon as I move over to this dark part, then all of a sudden that portion of my shoulder is going to disappear. So if the bright front lighting coming from behind the camera is crucial, but what makes the most difference is putting up a backdrop. You can even put up a sheet, as long as it's a consistent color behind you that doesn't have a pile of shadows on it, right? A consistent color behind you for the program to go in and key out. That's the main thing for backgrounds.
It's a color that's not part of your skin tone or clothing.
Yes, the color of the sheet cannot be of your skin tone or your clothing, Trevor. Absolutely. Yeah, that's probably worse than not having a backdrop.
Gray and green.
Yeah, right.
Although my skin is a little gray.
Yeah, early on, I once we started the show, I realized I'm going to need some space, and then all of a sudden Zoom started, and with the meetings and everything, we're just constantly on Zoom, and so I thought I've got to have a standard background. And I used to have just the frame of the cabinet behind me, and I put these little symbols up there just for fun. People ask about them all the time if I'm not on a Masonic Zoom meeting, but but then I saw again, watching YouTube University, you can learn a lot on YouTube, and they talked about having a contrasting color with some light enhancement. So I just have a light lamp sitting on the ground, not to give away all my secrets here, but just a lamp sitting on the ground basically, and a blue curtain essentially. And so it blocks out the daylight. If it's daylight, it's not now, but it would block out the daylight, but then it also gives a contrasting color and gives some depth to the space. I'm in a pretty small space. It's only about 6 by 6. It's not really a big room. So those little elements help with the video.
Yeah, absolutely. The backgrounds can be a challenge if the lighting isn't good, or if the key is the method that the Zoom uses to add the background is not good quality. As a chroma keyer goes, Zoom does a pretty good job, but at the same time, you does require the necessary backdrop and lighting to make that work. And I have seen situations where it can be distracting, right? To have people talking to people and half their faces disappearing constantly. So
I know that a lot of people are going to appreciate the tips and tricks and things that they've got off of this episode, and really want to thank you again, Chris, for making the time to come and do your presentation for that. And I think that everyone will have a benefit from it, and thanks again.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. We wish you a lot of success in your upcoming virtual meetings, and we may have to go to a few and learn for a few things down here. That's for sure. And with that, unless Trevor or David, do you have anything else to say? No? Brother Chris, do you have any closing words for us?
No, thanks for having me on. It's an important topic, very timely. So I appreciate that you guys do this podcast and to help get the information out.
Great. Well, with that, Brother Christopher Croda, thank you very much, of the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and the Yukon Technology Committee. Thank you very much for being here today. And on behalf of Stephen, Trevor, and David and myself, we wish everybody a good and safe and healthy time out there. Goodbye.